Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. Dutch GP Race Review Edition. My God, that was maybe not the most interesting race, but it was definitely spicy. It was like F1 came back from summer break and decided to just be chaotic from FP1 all the way through to the checkered flag at the end of the race, because my God, it's been a jam-packed weekend of plenty cars beaching themselves into the gravel, a few crashes, a very tight qualifying, hard racing, more crashes, DNFs, and a huge moment for the championship. Now, we have so much to get into, and we're just going to dive right in with Sauber. We have Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 17th, finished 14th, and Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified 13th, finished 15th. I think I'd firstly say it wasn't quite the qualifying we expected from Sauber, or we've come to expect from Sauber. They've been, on the whole, recently pretty good when it comes to qualifying. A trend that we're seeing appear is Gabriel Bortoleto actually qualifying better than Hülkenberg, who's actually known as Mr. Saturday, but a lot of his qualifyings this year, as we said in driver ratings, haven't actually been to the standard that we expect from Nico Hülkenberg, and Bortoleto has managed to sort of get the jump on him quite a few race weekends when it comes to qualifying. But on the whole, both the qualifying positions of these drivers were not what we expected. I do kind of expect them to make it into Q3, and if they can't get Q3, then a high Q2, which is where Bortoleto was, but Hülkenberg in P17 is just not what I expect from him at all. Quite punchy start from Nico Hülkenberg going on the soft tyres, which basically committed him to a two-stop race when there did seem to be the possibility that a lot of the drivers were going to go for one-stops. And to start so far back, going on the softs at a track where overtaking is quite difficult. Yes, Zandvoort does invite the dive bomb. We've seen plenty of that today. But it didn't feel like the correct tyre to start him on, considering he was so far back. Starting him on the softs, obviously right out the back, committing him to a two-stop, which, yes, on paper is the quicker strategy. However, we have seen it before where the one-stop is actually then the preferred strategy that the drivers and the teams then tend to move on to. What I will say is, in the end, we ended up getting more than just a one-stop with safety cars and everything else coming into play towards the end, but didn't really seem like the right move, I would say, for Sauber to be making, having Hülkenberg on the softs. Never really managed to make an impression. As I said, this is a quite difficult track to overtake on, especially when you get stuck in the likes of a DRS train, which Nico Hülkenberg was in for quite a bit of the race. Early pit stops obviously put him further down the grid, managing to maybe try and regain a couple of positions, but in the end, it wasn't really a fantastic performance. He did, however, manage to finish ahead of his teammate. Gabriel Bortoleto's race wasn't great, I would say. In fact, it was pretty poor right from the offset. I think he lost about 6 places on the opening lap, and it seemed that he was kind of struggling out there. He was on the mediums, which I would say either that or the hard seemed to be a sort of preferred tyre for the majority of the grid, but just really wasn't working for him. He then obviously had contact with Lance Stroll that broke his front wing, and he was running for a fair bit of the session. Did they ever actually fix his front wing, or did he just drive with a front wing end plate just off the car? For a long time, quite a few laps, the front wing end plate on his car was just broken, hanging off, and it was causing a bit of an unsettling feeling amongst some of the drivers, even Oliver Behrman over the radio saying, I'm a little bit worried by Bortoleto's front wing here. It ended up breaking off, and it did cause a little bit of a problem on the track. It was reported as being slippery, and that's just because there was a big bit of carbon fibre on the track. But however, not having that bit of end plate on his front wing did sort of hamper his running. He was one of the 3 drivers that didn't pit at the second safety car, I think it was, and it managed to sort of leap him up into the points. The only problem is that he had to pit again, and when he pitted again, it chucked him right down the back of the pack, and that was really it. He wasn't going to be able to score any points anyway, but just a bit of a An unfortunate weekend for Sauber, especially when it comes to the championship and that very tight midfield battle, especially with how well their main competitors have done. A double points for Aston Martin and a P3 for Isaac Hadjar, which has meant that Racing Bulls have actually leapfrogged Sauber in the standings. So not great for Sauber, and something that they're going to want to hope to rectify in the next few races. Next up is Williams, and we have Alex Albon, who qualified 15th, finished 5th, and Carlos Sainz, who qualified 9th, finished 13th. A brilliant bounce back, I would say, for Alex Albon after, beaching his car in FP2, damaging the front wing. He ended up in the gravel. Then a poor qualifying 15th, to then go and finish 5th is brilliant. It's a brilliant job from Alex Albon. He had an absolutely incredible opening first lap. He managed to gain 5 positions within the first few corners and really just managed to go on and attack. He went from 15th, he's then in the points. And the race really then just begun to sort of come to him. He got very lucky through safety cars and 3 DNFs that really sort of propelled him up the order, and he's managed to finish 5th. What I will say, Albon benefited quite a bit from managing to sort of hold position in a little bit of a DRS train that was Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon and Liam Lawson. The 3 of them just sort of sat as a little pack, just lap after lap after lap, nobody really making any moves. They seemed quite content to just hold position, and that really sort of benefited Alex Albon. But it's a decent result from Albon, going from 15th to 5th, and a decent haul of points in the bag for Williams. So great result for Albon. Carlos not so lucky, and I kind of just don't understand it. Carlos has been incredibly unlucky this season, and as I said in driver ratings, a lot of the issues that Carlos has been experiencing in the car, you could have sort of chopped up to just trying to get to grips with Williams and it being a new team and a different car and a different setup and way of doing things, and just him trying to get on top of it. But a lot of the times that Carlos has finished outside the points or had a disappointing performance, it's been from external factors, and that is exactly what happened today. He's had a decent qualifying after a string of not really qualifying that great. He starts 9th, he's running well in the sort of opening stint, he's holding position, as I said, and it looks like he's on track to score some decent points. And then comes Liam Lawson. On the safety car restart after Hamilton's crash, there's a little bit of a battle between Sainz and Lawson, and Sainz is going around the outside of turn 1, and the replays show Lawson moving across and almost cutting him off. They make contact, both the drivers end up with punctures, Carlos ends up needing a new front wing. They're dead last running on the road anyway by the time they limp back to the pits. And all that time in the pit lane, getting the tyres changed, new front wings and everything, mean that Carlos has a huge job of trying to get back up the field. And then Carlos Sainz gets handed a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision. How has Carlos Sainz been given a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision when the collision was caused by Liam Lawson? I don't understand it. I do not understand how the stewards decided to give Carlos a penalty when it was clearly shown on the replays that Lawson cut across. I don't get it. Maybe there's something I've missed. I mean, I'm recording directly after the race is finished, and there might be some new replay or angle showing where it perhaps could be Carlos's fault, but from what I've seen, it definitely felt like it was Liam's fault, and Carlos has somehow gotten penalised for it. I just don't understand the decision in that. Anyway, regardless of who's at fault, it ruined both their races. They both came out the pits on soft tyres, which seemed like a bold decision, but then it became clear that that was actually the only tyres that they had left. And it's just another poor weekend for Carlos Sainz in a string of incredibly poor weekends. And this is just not going the way any of us thought it would go. None of us expected Carlos to struggle this badly at Williams. And as I said, a lot of the issues are external factors. And it seems to be that whenever he seems to be running fairly well, something comes along and screws him over. This time it happened to be Liam Lawson. Speaking of Liam Lawson, we have V-Carb and Lawson, who qualified 8th, finished 12th, and Hadjar, who qualified 4th, finished 3rd. It's an alright qualifying for Lawson, and I say alright because I actually expect him to be a bit higher. I expect a bit more from the V-Carb. He's a decent driver in a good car, so he should be qualifying a little bit higher. The field is obviously incredibly close, and it's the tiniest of margins that are separating these drivers, but I do expect him to be a little bit higher up than P8. We've obviously already spoke about the biggest talking point of Lawson's race, which was his collision with Sainz. Again, I'm sorry, but I see it as being Lawson's fault, not Carlos's, but the stewards have obviously seen something else that deemed it to be Carlos Sainz's fault, and we're just going to have to make our peace with that, aren't we? His teammate, Isaac Hadjar, who, my God, has just been on it all weekend, and then gets an incredible qualifying position, and it looks like, right, it's P4. If he can just defend with all of his might, he can get some really good points, and it'll be a career best finish, P4. Let's go. And he does an incredible job, I will say, of holding off Charles Leclerc for as long as he did. And as the laps went by, Charles was really, really trying to attack him. And then later on, he had Russell trying to attack him. And I think he kept himself cool and calm and collected, and just didn't let the pressure get to him. I think he drove a pretty smart race, defended with all of his might to keep the likes of Russell and both the Ferraris and everything behind him, but also not going to try and attack the likes of Max Verstappen in front of him for a position that he probably deemed wasn't his to go and get. You know, he was fourth in that car, and even the team principal was like, this is, you know, probably the ceiling for this car. It's not probably going to be able to go and attack for a podium position. And Isaac knew that it probably wouldn't be the right call to go and try and attack Max, because Max would never have yielded a position to him, and it would have been incredibly difficult to get past him. He could have potentially ruined what was an incredible qualifying result, trying to attack for a position that car shouldn't really be going for. And rather than waste his energy and his tyres and everything like that, trying to attack in front, he did his best to defend with all of his might the cars behind him, and I think he did an incredible job out there on the track today. I think he was so impressive from the lights out right the way to the checkered flag. He didn't let the moment of qualifying and starting P4 get to his head, and he kept himself level. I think it's so impressive when these very young drivers are able to do that, because it was a brilliant, brilliant drive for him, and obviously it's resulted in a podium because he's managed to capitalise on Lando Norris's DNF. And oh my God, I've said it before when we've had rookies on the podium like Kimi Antonelli, or when Nico Hülkenberg went and got his first podium in over 200 race starts. These are the moments that make this sport so great. Isaac Hadjar in his rookie year getting a podium, getting a P3 podium, and just seeing the team celebrating and jumping about in the garage and cheering, and then Isaac running over, and everybody just being so happy for him, and Max and everything. That is what Formula One is about to me. It's the pure raw joy and emotion that just make this sport so special, because these drivers go out and put everything on the line, and when it pays off for them and they have days like today for Isaac Hadjar, it's just so incredibly special, and I'm so happy for him. And unfortunately, there's not huge amounts of time to celebrate because we've got Monza next weekend, but I do hope that he has a bit of a celebration, because that was an incredible result for Isaac Hadjar. I think it's a well-deserved podium. Obviously, he's managed to capitalise, but it was a brilliant drive, and it's great that he's been rewarded, obviously, in this way. And in saying this, I've actually just seen photos of Isaac Hadjar, and he's broken his trophy already. What is it with these drivers and just breaking trophies? I have to say, his face is absolutely priceless in that photo, but well done, Isaac Hadjar. Next up, we have Haas and Esteban Ocon, who qualified 18th, finished 10th, and Ollie Behrman, who qualified 19th, started from the pit lane and finished bloody 6th. I think it's a great result for Esteban Ocon, considering he was 18th and has managed to score a point. A big part of that came from not pitting on the first safety car when everyone else did. It promoted him up to 9th, and he really just managed to hold that position. And actually, both the Haas drivers went so long on those first set of tyres, not pitting, that it really helped propel them up the order, because they also got incredibly lucky by the likes of VSCs, another safety car and everything like that, to help them maintain positions. Ocon is a driver who's benefited greatly from 3 DNFs, from Charles, Lewis and Lando all DNFing, and it's managed to help bump him up the order to get a point. So a decent weekend and a nice result for Esteban Ocon. Ollie Behrman What a bloody result for Behrman. Again, managing to capitalise on certain situations, but to start from the pit lane and to finish P6 is a pretty damn good result, I would say. He obviously had an incredibly poor qualifying. I mean, both Haas drivers did actually. The laps in Q1 were absolutely terrible. There then was a bit of an issue with Haas, who hadn't covered his car within the 2 hours after qualifying had finished. So they were noted and sent to the stewards for not having the car covered in time, which I believe constitutes a breach of the Parc Fermé rules. But then they broke Parc Fermé anyway because they had to replace, I think it was 6 components on his PU, which I think that's actually just a whole new PU, which then demoted him to be starting from the pit lane. And I think he's done a great job out there today, and obviously a fantastic first stint on his original tyres, on the mediums as well. Obviously a fantastic first stint for both those drivers, Ocon and Behrman, on the hard tyres, managing to eke out as much performance from them as they can and go so long, not pitting on the first safety car to really sort of bump them up and gain track position that way. And he would have still finished in the points without some external factors such as Antonelli's penalties and Lando Norris then going and DNFing from the race. But on the whole, a solid drive, I would say, for Ollie Behrman. One thing I will say about Haas that's really annoying is they obviously have the race pace in the car, and they obviously have some decent racecraft to be able to go and attack for points. I know that Oliver Behrman is very scrappy out on track sometimes, and it's a bit messy, and I'm kind of just chopping that up to it being his rookie year. I do expect him to be a bit of a cleaner racer in his sophomore year. And as much as it's amazing that they can go out and fight for these points having had terrible qualifyings, I really need them to start sorting the qualifyings out, because it's becoming a bit ridiculous that they're qualifying so badly very consistently. It's great that they're able to go and make it up in the race, but imagine how much better it would be if they could just qualify decent. If they could just qualify decent rather than these terrible qualifying performances and then having to work so hard on race day to try and get into the points when they could potentially be getting into Q3 or even just outside the top 10. I would just like them to sort the qualifyings out, because it's clear that the pace and everything in the car is there. We've seen them qualify good before. I need the consistency back, and that goes for both drivers, Esteban and Ollie Behrman. Next up we have Alpine and Pierre Gasly, who qualified 14th, finished 17th, and Franco Colapinto, who qualified 16th, finished 11th. A very sort of nondescript meh weekend really for Alpine. They were kind of nowhere. They were barely shown on the broadcast, and like nothing really happened. Franco Colapinto starting on the softs, again, seems like a bit of a mad choice considering the fact that he was starting so far back. The soft tyres are only going to last him so long. He's going to have to pit early. It just seemed like a bit of a mental choice. Colapinto had obviously managed to get past Gasly. They then call team orders because Colapinto's tyres have just fallen off a cliff. They then obviously go and swap the drivers a bit later in the race back, but that's beside the point. They just didn't really do much. And both the drivers just didn't really seem to have the pace, didn't really seem, I mean, you know, they're getting stuck in DRS trains and all this kind of stuff, but there was never really a moment where I thought, man, Alpine are going to score points. I mean, it's a career best finish for Franco Colapinto at Alpine, so that's something, isn't it? An 11th for Colapinto, we could consider that's moving in the right direction. Maybe Flavio Briatore's comments at the team principal's press conference earlier in the week lit fire under Colapinto's ass. I don't know, but it was very interesting comments, I will say, from Flavio on Colapinto. He basically said that looking at the performances and how Colapinto's been doing, it seems pretty clear to him that it was probably not the right time to bring Colapinto into F1, and, you know, maybe he should have stayed in F2 for a little bit longer. And it's something we've all been sort of talking about, that it was probably too quick to put him into a full-time race seat, especially in a team where the car is not that great. And when you chop it all up and make the comparison, Colapinto's actually performing worse than Jack Doohan was, and Briatore is obviously very aware of that. I just think it's quite the statement to make when you put everything behind Colapinto. You were the one that was hyping him up, that has spent all this money to get him into Alpine for 5 years on a reserve deal than just to put him in place of Jack Doohan? And is he regretting his decisions? It seems maybe a little bit. And I have to say, I don't think Colapinto should have been given the drive. I don't think he was ready. His best result was an 11th. Can he hope to score points in the next races? Maybe. I don't know. That Alpine's obviously a difficult car. Pierre Gasly's obviously struggling with it. It's a pretty shit weekend for Alpine, to be quite honest. And they're getting left behind and dropped in the Constructors' Championship. They're sitting dead last with 20 points. Haas is above them in P9, 24 points ahead of them. So they've got a bit of work to do. And I would imagine that a lot of the problems that this team are facing, on a whole, stem from how uncertain everything feels at Alpine. And it's been like this for a few years. They've been cycling through team principles. Finally felt like we had one that was, going to stick in Oliver Oaks. And then scandal happened at High Tech and he buggered off. I think he's now just back at High Tech. Flavio's come in as quite a controversial figure. They've dropped their engine program. There's rumours of the whole thing getting packaged up for a sale. And even if that's not true and they're not selling, it will cause such uncertainty within the team. And I think that's a big part as to why they're maybe not performing. Obviously, the Renault engine's not great. The car's quite tricky. And there's just huge uncertainty and, it's seems like quite a toxic environment. So no wonder they're not performing, but well done Colapinto in a P11 and just not a great weekend for Gasly. Moving on. Aston Martin with Fernando Alonso, who qualified 10th, finished 8th, and Lance Stroll, who didn't actually set a time in qualifying, started 19th, finished 7th. Lance Stroll. What a weekend Lance Stroll has had. Crashes in FP2. It's a big crash. Needs a lot of work done to the car. Huge job from the mechanics to get that car repaired, get it turned around for FP3 in qualifying, only for Lance to then crash the car again in Q1 on nothing but pure driver error. I'm sorry. It was a completely avoidable mistake. And once again, he's made a mistake that, quite frankly, he shouldn't have done. I'm really sorry. He obviously dropped a tyre into the grass coming into turn 13, lost control of the car and spun off into the barriers. It's obviously a mistake, but a mistake that should not have happened, quite frankly. And I rest my case on that one. Huge job again from the mechanics to get that car turned around. Thankfully, not for nothing, the stewards decide he can obviously start the race and it looks like it's maybe all going to go a bit tits up for him. He pitched really early on lap 9 to stick on a set of the hard tyres, which automatically locks him into a 2-stop. There was no way that he couldn't 2-stop, and this is at a time when we're really sort of throwing it up of, should drivers 1-stop? Should they 2-stop? What's going to actually work in everyone's favour here? Thankfully for Lance Stroll, a pretty solid strategy from Aston Martin, which is not actually unusual at this rate. They've been pulling out some pretty big, bold strategies for Lance Stroll, and they seem to be working in his favour. And the fact he's managed to capitalise on a couple of safety cars, a couple of DNFs, he's managed to propel himself up to P7. So a pretty decent race and a solid haul of points for Lance Stroll. Just could have been a little bit easier for him if he hadn't decided to total his car in Q1 of qualifying. But that's the beauty of Lance Stroll. Total your car twice in a weekend, start dead last, and you still manage to finish P7. His teammate Fernando Alonso will probably be a bit happy with P8. However, he was not happy during the race, and I think all of Alonso's patience left the chat pretty quickly. To be fair to him, he had a pretty shit start. He lost 4 places right off the go. He then manages to get the undercut done on Yuki Tsunoda, caused a bit of a reaction. He pits, everyone else then starts to pit around him, and thankfully he manages to get the jump done on Yuki. They obviously pit him again using the advantages of the safety car, but it brings him out into a load of traffic. His patience has completely gone at this point. Thank God Yuki Tsunoda couldn't get past him, because I actually think that would have tipped Alonso over the edge slightly. He's over the radio saying, why are we not undercutting? Why are we not undercutting? And at this rate, it's very clear that no one else is going to be pitting. No one else, everyone else was just going to go right to the end. They do actually pit him again. He comes out P17. He's on fresh hards. We all thought his race is just completely unravelled and he's not going to score any points. There's too much of a fight to try and get through that many drivers to try and get some points in at a track where you can't really overtake. And, there's DRS trains forming all over the place and it's going to be really, really difficult for him. Who would have known that Lando Norris was going to have to retire from the race, and it would cause a safety car, which would mean quite a few of the drivers would dive into the pit. But who doesn't need to dive into the pit? Fernando Alonso, because he's on nice hard tyres that can take him to the end of the race. So actually ended up working out in his favour, and he's managed to score some points. Thank God, because the man was on the edge, and it definitely felt like he was going to lose his shit, to be quite frank. But thankfully, some points. And another double points haul for Aston Martin, thankfully. Again, very tight fight in the constructors for that team. They've obviously managed to drop Sauber a little bit, with neither of those drivers managing to score some points. However, it has meant that VCarb is getting a bit closer to them because of the amazing finish from Isaac Hadjar. Next up, we have Mercedes, and George Russell, who qualified 5th, finished 4th, and Kimi Antonelli, who qualified 11th, finished 16th. I think George Russell ran a pretty solid race today. I think he was fairly consistent throughout the whole thing, and actually kept himself pretty clean. He was obviously on the receiving end from a very aggressive move from Charles Leclerc into turn 12, I think it was, or round the outside of turn 11 going into the hairpin of turn 12. There's obviously differing views on it. I think on one side there's the question of, was Charles Leclerc off the track? Did he leave the track and gain the advantage? Or did George Russell not leave Charles Leclerc out of the room? What I will say is it was a very bold and very aggressive move from Charles Leclerc to try and muscle his way past George Russell. And at a track like Zandvoort, that is kind of how you need to get the overtakes done. You have to do bold moves. You have to be aggressive with it, because otherwise you're just going to sit behind the car in front of you for, 70 odd laps? It's not a track that's easy to get overtakes done on, so you do really have to sort of get your elbows out and muscle your way through. It is a bit of an unconventional spot to try and get an overtake around the outside done, especially because of the way the racing line works. You know, you go from the inside of turn 11 and cut across to the inside of turn 12, and on the racing line you're very close to the gravel on the inside. So to go around the outside of turn 11 and muscle your way through the inside of turn 12. Russell probably didn't see Charles coming. He's looking the opposite direction from where Charles Leclerc's coming. Doesn't really expect him to probably try and make a move that way. It takes the racing line, which means that Charles Leclerc isn't actually on the track. As I said, muscles his way past Russell. Russell concedes the place. The two differing views come from the drivers. Russell says he was off the track. Leclerc says that he wasn't left the room. Obviously, they both ended up with damage. I will say that Russell didn't really do anything wrong. Leclerc probably shouldn't have made that move. It's obviously under investigation. Toto Wolff has come out and said that he doesn't want Charles Leclerc to get a penalty because it'll carry on to Monza, and he doesn't want that. However, he believes that Charles Leclerc was in the wrong. I do also believe that Leclerc was in the wrong. God, this is a tough day for Leclerc fans. It was a bold move from Leclerc. As I said, it was very aggressive. You do have to be aggressive around this track, but if he had maybe waited even just a few turns, he would have gotten the DRS to Russell and could maybe have gone in for the move at turn 1. Wasn't necessary to get the job done there. Leclerc obviously thought so, but it did just seem tad unnecessary. Did he have to make the move at turn 12? Probably not, but he was all in. Once he'd committed to it, there was nowhere else for him to go. He had to do something. He went for it, and I mean, Leclerc managed to get the position. It was unfortunate for Russell. Unfortunately, not that long after it, Russell then got another blow because of the damage on his car. Mercedes then ordered for them to swap the cars, so Antonelli gets ahead of him. Russell not that happy about that either, but I can see why. All that being said, it was a pretty consistent race for George Russell, and that's one thing about George. He is very consistent. He is in a fight for P3 between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. Great result for Max and George, the fact that Charles Leclerc DNF'd obviously, but a decent haul of points for George to keep him in that battle, and that is key at this moment. His teammate Kimi Antonelli, it's just another incredibly disappointing race for Kimi Antonelli. In fact, it's actually a fairly poor weekend on the whole for Kimi Antonelli. Obviously beaches his car in FP1 in the gravel, misses out. He's then got a fairly poor qualifying. You know, it's P11, it's not terrible, but I do expect him to be in Q3 fairly regularly and more consistently than he has been. He's off the back of a string of very poor performances. Everything does seem to maybe be looking up. It looks like he's going to score some decent points. He's having some decent battles out there, a good hard fight with Yuki Tsunoda. He's then managing to get close into Leclerc towards the later stages of the race. He then pits for a set of softs. He goes for the undercut on Leclerc. Ferrari then respond by bringing Leclerc in for a set of soft tyres. And this is really where shit hits the fan. Leclerc comes out of the pit lane just ahead of Antonelli. Coming into turn 3, Antonelli decides to take the low line, which is a line that we haven't seen anyone really take apart from Max Verstappen. However, he could make it work. Antonelli obviously could not make that line work. He carries so much speed into that corner, goes for the low line, but because he's carrying so much speed, he understeers massively, which pulls the car up to the higher line, which is where Charles Leclerc is, the racing line. Charles Leclerc has not moved from that racing line. Antonelli goes clean into the side of Charles Leclerc, spins him off into the barriers, destroys Charles Leclerc's car, and Leclerc obviously ends up DNFing from the race. I think the whole thing was wholly unnecessary and it shouldn't have happened. Antonelli should have left the room going into that corner. The issue being he was carrying way too much speed, which caused him to have understeer. He shouldn't have actually tried the move in the first place. It's not a move that you see happen a lot. Antonelli never really established himself down the inside, and whilst it was probably quite an enticing move, it was very ambitious in the end, and it obviously resulted in Charles Leclerc's DNF and a 10-second time penalty for Antonelli. I know I've just said that you have to be aggressive at tracks like Zandvoort to get the moves done. However, this doesn't feel like a move that should have happened. No one tried that move the entire race, apart from really Max Verstappen in the opening lap, which we'll come and talk about in a second. But the move from Kimi Antonelli on Charles Leclerc kind of felt like desperation to me, and I feel like he was maybe trying to take the pressure off him a little bit by finishing the race with a decent haul of points. However, all he's really done is just piled the pressure back onto him. And listen, it's just another race where Kimi Antonelli hasn't scored points. He's caused a collision with Charles Leclerc, ruined his race. He's then had to come back to the pit lane, has been found speeding in the pit lane, been given a 5-second penalty for that, gets given a 10-second penalty for causing a collision with Charles Leclerc. His race completely unravelled all in 2 corners. And it's just another weekend where we're sat here talking about Antonelli not performing as he should be performing. It's not a move that should have been done. It was incredibly ambitious. However, it reeks of desperation to me. I'm really sorry, but it does. And all it's done is really just left us with questions around Antonelli. We know he's a good driver. We know a lot of the poor performances have been down to bad strategies or reliability issues with the car, but he himself has also not really been performing to the standard that we expect Kimi Antonelli to perform. I know it's his rookie season, but when you look at the rookies around him in not as good machinery, the Gabriel Bortoletos, yes, it's been a shit race for him, but the Gabriel Bortoletos, the Isaac Hadjars, you look at their performances and then you look at Antonelli, who is in, let's say, the best machinery out of all of the rookies. How is he not having the performances that the others are having? Where is the consistency from Antonelli that the other rookies are showing us? That's where I begin to have my doubts about Kimi Antonelli. One man who will not take his foot off Kimi Antonelli's neck is Jacques Villeneuve, who basically said that Antonelli is not fit for F1, not suited to the sport, shouldn't be in it, and in not so many words basically said that if he was Toto Wolff, he wouldn't be giving Antonelli another contract for next year. I do think it's a bit harsh. I think there is a lot of different things that have gone into Antonelli and his lack of performance. However, I can see exactly where he's coming from. He's not performing to the level that we expected, and it's unfortunate that his rookie season is going to be defined by these performances and not by some of the great performances we've seen, because unfortunately for Antonelli, the bad performances are now outnumbering the good ones at this rate. Next up, we have Red Bull and Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified 12th, finished 9th, and Max Verstappen, who qualified 3rd, finished 2nd. Can you believe that my prediction that Yuki Tsunoda would score points this weekend actually came true? Because even I didn't believe it. Especially after the practice sessions and the quali, I didn't think he was going to score points today. And here we are, a P9. What I will say is I don't think Yuki's drive is anything really to write home about. It's amazing he scored points, but it's capitalising on 3 DNFs, let's be quite frank. Without them, he would have finished outside the points. It's great that he's scoring points, but is it Is it going to continue? Who knows? Is this the start of an upward trajectory? Who knows? None of us can figure out what is going on down at Red Bull, so we will just have to wait and see in Monza. I think actually could particularly suit Monza, the Red Bull. You know, high-speed corners, long straights, characteristics that might actually suit the Red Bull. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see next week. I don't think it was a race to write home about for Tsunoda, but some decent battles and a couple of points in the bag, so who can argue with that? Max Verstappen is just a menace to these McLaren drivers. He will not let up. He knows he's not going to get the championship. He knows he's not going to get P2 in the championship. He might get P3. He doesn't actually seem that bothered about it anymore. He is now just taking things on a race-by-race basis. He might not even be in with a chance to win the races, but he will cause bother for McLaren as best as he can, which is exactly what Max and Red Bull did starting on the soft tyres. It was a very punchy move from Max and Red Bull to put him on the soft tyres, but he managed to do exactly what he wanted, which was to cause a bit of a stir in Camp McLaren. Big lunge into turn 1 going round the outside, doesn't really manage to get it done, has a huge big wobble into turn 3. Somehow, God knows how he manages to keep it on the track and manages to keep the car pointing in the right direction, retakes P2 from Lando Norris, and then just absolutely sends it. That move at turn 3 from Max Verstappen, that is what hunger looks like. He was not willing to concede P2 to Lando Norris right then and there. He was putting everything into it. And this is what I mean when I say Max is willing to risk it all to get moves done. He was willing to put it all on the line to get P2, and as I said, that's exactly what hunger looks like, and it was incredible driving from Verstappen. Obviously, he's on the soft tyres, they fall off pretty quickly, he doesn't manage to get close to Piastri, and Norris manages to get past him pretty easily. Then, for quite a lot of the race, he's really just running by himself. You know, the two McLarens have managed to open up a bit of a gap, he's not really managing to go and attack them. Hajar's not really coming close to Max to try and get an attack done. So he's just kind of running in P3, going for a lovely Sunday drive for the majority of the race. And even through the safety car restarts, he doesn't manage to sort of get a jump and attack Lando Norris. He just kind of keeps himself to himself in P3. And then on the second safety car restart, he's on the soft, the McLarens are on the hard, and you think, my God, here we go, it's going to get spicy. But it just really sort of highlighted the problems of the Red Bull. Max is over the radio complaining about the ride. He's unable to keep the pace with the McLarens despite being on the soft tyre, and it just shows, one, how much of a rocket ship the McLaren have, but two, just how much the Red Bull is struggling at the moment. He's on for a P3. He's pretty happy with that. It's another podium for his home race in front of his home crowd. He's probably going to be pretty happy. And then Norris DNFs, and it's a P2 for Max Verstappen, which I imagine he's bloody delighted with. I don't think he would have expected a P2. I think he was probably pretty happy with a P3 and pretty happy just to cause a bit of a rumbling with McLaren, get them sweating a little bit, and he's walked away with a P2. It won't be how he wanted to get a P2. He won't have wanted to get the second step on the podium through Lando Norris DNFing, but I imagine he's pretty happy with it. Next up, we have Ferrari pressing Charles Leclerc, who qualified 6th, did not finish, and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 7th, did not finish. Double depression down at Ferrari. Double DNF. It's fun, isn't it? Feel great about life right now. Fuck me. It's been a bit of an odd weekend for Lewis Hamilton, to be quite honest with you. A bit of an odd one in the practice sessions, a couple of full 360 spins. One of these weird weekends where he's actually ahead of Charles Leclerc on pace. It seemed like, anyway, it seemed like there was a big difference in each side of the garages. It seemed like Lewis Hamilton had almost made peace with the fact that the Ferrari's a shit show. It's just a bad car. You know, it's not got the pace. It's a pretty shit car, and he's not going to win races and anything like that at this point. All he can really do is try and get some solid points. And he seemed to not really fight or, you know, overdrive the car this weekend. Just went out with the car, and it seemed like he was getting the performance out of it. And when I say getting the performance out of it, I don't mean that he's going to start getting podiums and stuff. I just mean that he might score some decent points and not be out in Q1 of qualifying. You know, he can get into Q3. He can score some nice points. You know, it's not all doom and gloom. Whereas on the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc, he admitted it himself that he was chasing something that quite obviously wasn't there. Charles all weekend has been experimenting with setups, experimenting with all these different things that really haven't worked. And I can't blame him, because Ferrari keep talking about this hidden potential within this car, this untapped potential within the Ferrari. And I don't know what they're talking about. Nobody seems to be able to tell us what they're talking about, because this untapped hidden potential, they can't seem to unlock it. So what is it? What are you talking about? There is obviously some issues with the car, the ride height being one of them. They can't run the car as low as they would like because it makes the car illegal, so they have to run it a bit higher to make it legal, which then affects the performance of it. And that does seem to be what the problem actually was in Hungary. We believed, or we were told, there was a broken chassis on Leclerc's car, but actually they did increase the tyre pressure in the car to lift it up a little bit so that it would be legal, and so that they didn't wear the plank of the car, which affected Charles' race. It just all seems to be a complete mess. The car's a mess, the drivers can't drive it, the team doesn't really seem to be gelling. There seems to be huge communication problems with the team. So already they're on the back foot. And then Lewis Hamilton, coming around turn 3, drops a tyre onto a wet part of the track, onto the paint, which is wet, and he loses control of the car, crashes into the barrier. It was a driver error, probably shouldn't have happened. I think it's fairly common knowledge that when you are in wet conditions, you're on a slick tyre, maybe not put your tyres on surfaces that are going to be quite slippery. And that would be the painted surfaces on the outside of the track. Listen, it was a driver error and it cost him. He DNF'd. There's not much more I can say about it. Shit weekend for Lewis Hamilton. There we are. Charles Leclerc, shit weekend for him too. Again, chasing something that doesn't seem to be there. Trying to chase and unlock this hidden potential, you know, this untapped hidden potential, which I actually think at this rate is a myth. I genuinely think it's a myth. I think it's something they made up to make themselves feel better. Seems to be running pretty alright. Did lose out on the safety car caused by Hamilton's crash. He had pitted for fresh tyres right before Hamilton crashed, which then caused the safety car. Meant he did lose out a position or a couple of positions. Obviously has that very aggressive move on George Russell. I'm putting the blame on Charles Leclerc. I think it was aggressive to try and muscle your way through there. Maybe a bit unnecessary. It obviously worked in his favour regardless. We are waiting on the steward's decisions on whether or not he is going to be penalised for dangerous driving, causing a collision, take your pick. It is apparently with the stewards right now, and there has been nothing come out from the FIA. Then there's the Antonelli of it all, which we've obviously spoken about. It was overly ambitious and it cost Leclerc his race. Again, a shit weekend. There's not really much I can say about it, to be honest. His race was ruined. It wasn't his fault. We move on to Monza. I have to say, the images of Charles Leclerc, the clips that they played of Charles Leclerc sitting in the dunes, watching the race on some random's phone, were absolute comedy gold. Like, this isn't a real sport. It's moments like that where I just think, what is this sport? I just found it hilarious how they just kept flashing to Charles and he was just depressed watching cars go round, and then he's just watching on somebody's phone, listening in to what is happening. I thought it was brilliant. But yeah, as I said, a shit weekend for Ferrari. Fingers crossed it's better in Monza. I really can't take a depressing result in Monza of all places. I mean, at this rate, I would just take them finishing the race. I would take them finishing the race. Points are a bonus. And finally, McLaren, with Lando Norris, who qualified second, DNF'd, and Oscar Piastri, who qualified first, finished first. We'll talk about Oscar first because he's got the least to talk about. I think it's a brilliant result for Oscar Piastri, obviously. Looked to be second to his teammate the entire weekend, come into qualifying. Those first runs of Q3, pulls it out the bag. This is something we know about Oscar. He's a builder. He doesn't come straight out the bat in FP1, sticking at top of the timesheets. He likes to ease himself into a weekend and start to build up the performance and the speed. And then when it really matters, in Q3, he pulls it out the bag. He was 12 milliseconds ahead of Lando on those first runs in Q3. Neither driver obviously could improve in the second runs, and it was a new lap record and it got in pole position. It was a brilliant drive for him. Nobody could get up behind him to really sort of put an attack in, and he really just set the pace for the entire race. I think it was an incredible drive from Oscar Piastri this weekend, and he's now sitting very, very comfortable in the championship, 34 points ahead of Lando Norris, who unfortunately DNF'd from the race through no fault of his own. Lando was lightning the whole weekend through free practice 1, 2, 3, Q1, Q2, misses out on pole by 12 milliseconds, has a disappointing start to the race, loses out to Max Verstappen, manages to gain the position back, and then is really just putting everything in it to try and get close to Oscar. He gets told that there's nothing strategy-wise that the team can do to try and benefit him. It's now all what happens on the racetrack, and it's up to him to get up behind Oscar and get the overtake done. And through every safety car restart and everything like that, he keeps it there. He never really loses sight of Oscar, and then he has a mechanical issue and he has to DNF for the race. He comes over the radio reporting smoke in his cockpit. There's smoke coming out the back of the car. Andrea Stella says he doesn't know whether it was a chassis issue or a mechanical issue. It looked like it was an issue with the PU, and I have said this previously in one of the races where it was either the Mercedes or a Williams had DNF from the race with a power unit issue, that there was a very big risk that the Mercedes PU would fail one of the McLaren drivers. And I got told, no, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. And I said it, and I said it again, that there was a very big risk that the PU unit would fail, and here we are. The Mercedes power unit has once again failed a driver. Unfortunately, this time, it failed Lando Norris, who was, seven points behind Piastri, and is now 34 points. It's a horrible end to the race for Lando Norris, and I'm gutted for him. Through no fault of his own, on a weekend where he has been pretty flawless, hasn't actually put a foot wrong, to have his race ended that way is devastating for him. I feel so bad for him. The shots of Lando Norris sitting on the sand dunes, helmet on, looking dejected, may just be the image that encapsulates this championship fight. And I feel like this could be the deciding moment in the championship. I feel like this moment, Lando Norris DNFing in Zandvoort, could be the deciding moment in this championship. We've got 9 races left and there's 34 points between them. And what makes it harder for Lando now is the fact that he's fighting his teammate. He's fighting someone in equal machinery to himself. It's not like he's fighting Max Verstappen, who could go through a string of races where he's really struggling because the machinery, they're in the exact same machinery, so it makes the fight even closer, and it's going to be harder for him to close that gap to Oscar in these next 9 races. That being said, there could be something catastrophic happens with Oscar. He could DNF from a race, and that will help Lando, close the gap significantly, but it does feel like Lando's got a big task ahead from him, and it does feel like this could be a deciding factor. And that's a shame, and it's not how anyone, from the drivers to the teams to the fans, it's not how we want a championship decided. We don't want mechanical issues to decide the championship. We want hard racing on track to decide our championships. It does, however, feel like this DNF could be a deciding factor in this championship. And that is everything from us. We'll be back very soon with our predictions for Monza next week. Thank you very much for listening and watching along. Let me know your thoughts on the race in the comment box down below. We will see you very soon. I love you. Bye.